cégnek az alapítóját, Warhammer, Games Workshop, mindenben benne volt a keze, hatalmas, üvöltő, rivaltkással, kérlek, hívjátok ki, mert különben fél és nem mer kijönni. So, Ian Livingstone.
Hi, hello. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. I must say it's been amazing being here. I had no idea that Final Fantasy was so popular in this country. It's incredible. So thank you all. So I'm going to talk a little bit about life in games. Now I joined the games industry not long after chess was invented. And I've enjoyed every minute. You know, life for me has been a game, and games are my life. And you know, you're never too young to start, never too old to stop. So I will never retire. I'm writing a new Final Fantasy game book at the moment. And I hope that you'll all be killed in multiple ways when you read it. My job is to lure you to your doom, promise you riches, gold, treasures, and destroy you. But let's have a little bit of historical backdrop. So this is a kind of a summary of what I've done in my life. Started Games Workshop in 1975. I'm going to show you visually what I've done, but just briefly, Final Fantasy game books, launched Lara Croft in the 90s, got into mobile games in the 2000s, and went back into making big games at Sumo Digital. But my heart really does belong to Final Fantasy game books and role-playing games in particular, because it's the connection with humans in the physical space I find so compelling. So this is a little bit of my games collection back home. I'm a big collector of games. I don't just pretend to be into games, I really am a games geek. I've got over 1,500 board games at home, and lots of video games, lots of books and stuff, and of course, got Lara. So, Lara Croft, I'm not going to talk about Lara today because that's a different conversation, but it was great to be part of seeing a female character do so well in what had been traditionally a male environment for content in the games industry. And to be part of that and meeting Angelina Jolie on the set of the movie, I'm still recovering from that. That was a fascinating time, but we're going back to my roots. So this is me in 1975. On the handsome guy on that side, that's me. John Peake and Steve Jackson. We started Games Workshop in 1975 in our flat in Shepherd's Bush. We all had pretty boring, low-paid jobs, and we thought we stayed in a lot and played board games, but we weren't happy with the board games that were published in those days. They were pretty ordinary family games, and we thought, well, why can't we do something different? And John was a civil engineer. He started making backgammon boards, which he sold to his colleagues at work, and I would sell them to shops, and Steve would do the administration. But that really wasn't us either. There were still traditional games. So we published a newsletter, this one here that Steve's holding. It's called Owl and Weasel, a full-colour glossy magazine, as you can see. And we sent it out to everybody we knew in games. We printed like 50 copies. And somehow, we're not sure how, but a copy found its way to the gentleman in the middle, young Gary Gygax. And he read our magazine and said, wow, and wrote to us and said, would we review Dungeons & Dragons? And Dungeons & Dragons, of course, didn't look very much. Pretty ordinary box with a very amateurish illustration. But when you open that box, D&D opened your imagination like no game had ever done before, and I don't think any game ever will again. the first role-playing game where, I'm sure you all know, we have a dungeon master who designs a labyrinth of passageways and populates them with monsters and treasure, and the other players take on the roles of heroes and wizards and clerics and thieves and go these fantastic journeys of the mind, creating theatre on the fly as they explore the worlds of fantasy. So we ordered 6 copies because that's all the money we had in the world. And on the back of that huge order, we got an exclusive 3-year distribution agreement for the whole of Europe, because Gygax was also operating out of his flat in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin. So suddenly we were the European distributors of Dungeons & Dragons, even though we lived in a very small, dingy flat in Shepherd's Bush in West London. But we promoted it and started selling in mail order. Although we went to the States in 1976. This was us at Gen Con 9. In this particular photo on the far left, you've got Fritz Lieber, the science fiction author, Gary Gygax, the co-creator of Dungeons & Dragons, Professor Barker, who invented a game called Empire of the Battle Throne, myself holding the boxes, Rob Kuntz, who wrote a lot of the D&D material, and got Steve, my business partner, smirking at the front. We came back to the UK, went to the bank manager and said, "Can we borrow £10,000 please? We're the European distribution company for Dungeons & Dragons. It's a game where you kill monsters and find treasure and go these journeys of the mind." And the bank manager looked at us, rather like a dog watches television, had no understanding whatsoever, and asked us to leave. So we had to live in a van for over 3 months. But when you're young and enthusiastic, this is not hardship, this is living the dream. So we built Games Workshop very slowly because we couldn't raise any finance. So we decided to change Alan Weasel to a White Dwarf in 1977. We needed to make our business look more professional. And we opened our very first shop in 1978. This is the opening day in April 1978 of the very first Games Workshop. We started publishing board games. This is, I'm in this photo here, this is when we were playtesting Talisman before we bought the rights to it and published Talisman, which came out. I'm sure many of you have enjoyed playing Talisman. And then we started Citadel Miniatures in 1978 with Brian Ansell, who ultimately became the managing director of Games Workshop. And of course, through Citadel Miniatures, we published Warhammer. How did Warhammer come about? Well, our 3-year exclusive distribution agreement for Dungeons & Dragons ended, and Gygax wanted to merge his company with Games Workshop. We said no to that merger because we didn't want to spend half our life in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin, and we wanted to remain independent. And so Warhammer was the game that became our powerhouse that replaced D&D for us as a company. And of course, Warhammer started life as possibly being a mail order, single sheet supplement, but it developed into a product, and of course Warhammer evolved with its success, and when Warhammer 40k came out in 1987, it was suddenly a big boom in the company's history. Everyone, of course, is now aware of Warhammer. Games Workshop continues to grow, and all the shops in the UK in particular are being rebranded as Warhammer stores. And I'm not going to talk any much more about Warhammer and Workshop now because I'm here to talk about fighting fantasy, but I wrote a book that came out a couple of years ago called Dice Men, which is an origin story, like a personal memoir of all our struggles the first 10 years of Games Workshop. And I'm delighted to say it's now available in Hungary, thanks to Chameleon Comics. So how did fighting fantasy come about? Well, we used to run these events called Games Day, where hundreds, sometimes thousands of people would come along and play role-playing games, And it was at the Games Day 1979 when the editor of Penguin Books came along and said, "Wow, what are these people doing?" I said, "They're playing role-playing games." And she said, Geraldine Cook, "Would you write a book about the hobby of role-playing games?" And we said, better would be to write a book which allowed you to experience being in a role-playing game. And she said, great, send in a synopsis. So, long story short is that we wrote a concept called The Magic Quest, but it took Penguin Books nearly 2 years to finally say yes to publishing it. And The Warlock of Firetop Mountain finally came out in 1982. They were different, as I'm sure many of you know, that these were books, that no books are usually a linear narrative, which you may or may not relate to the characters. When these books, you, the reader, are the hero. It's all about your adventure. You make the choices. You decide what happens during that adventure. And it's my job to make sure that you don't. So, a branching narrative where you make choices at the end of each page, but it also had a game system attached to it. So when you confront the monsters, you roll dice. So that was the essence of the role-playing. They were trying to strip the essence of a role-playing game into book format to make it a single-player role-playing experience. When they first came out, there was an enormous outcry by the media because we had lots of ghouls and demons and undead and skeletons in our books, and because you were confronting them, the media assumed that you were entering these dark worlds of satanic universes. So the Evangelical Alliance published an 8-page warning guide saying, because you're interacting with ghouls and demons, you're just bound to get possessed by the devil. A vicar near Penguin Books threatened to chain himself to their railings until they were banned. A woman in deep Islamophobia phoned her local radio station and said, having read one of my books, her son levitated. So the children listening thinking, for £1.50 we can fly? Huge sales boost, thank you, whoever that was. There were magazine articles written about the dangers of children using their imagination. There were petitions sent in to Penguin Books, our publisher, saying, "We, the Understand, demand the series of Final Fantasy game books are withdrawn because they're dangerous and harmful for children." I have their addresses. I will be back. At the same time, of course, teachers and some parents were thinking, these are great for reluctant readers, giving you choice, improving critical thinking, improving literacy, giving you a safe place to be adventurous and heroic when the real world might not be so fun. And so gradually perceptions change, but at the first we were always fighting battles. And eventually we built up all our books to become one world of Titan and one continent in Alancia, where I based most of my books. So, one thing that often gets forgotten about is the contribution that the artists make to the success of our books in particular, because we used to have incredible artists for the covers and also for the illustrations. And because it was a children's imprint, Puffin Books, Puffin wanted to use artists with the very soft covers on them, because they were published for children. So they wanted one with a little toadstool and a gnome and butterflies, a little smiling frog. I said, no. We want covers that's going to rip the faces off the readers. And we want to use our Games Workshop artists, because children are not scared, they're excited by this art. They know what is reality and what is fantasy, and this gets them excited. So, to their credit, Penguin Books agreed that we could use our artists, and so we used people like Peter Andrew Jones, Russ Nicholson, sadly who passed away not too long ago, who illustrated the wall of Firetop Mountain, Carl Kopinski, who I worked with more recently, who painted the cover for the limited edition hardback of the Warlock of Firetop Mountain that came out recently. He also did part of the Assassins of Alancia. He does normally a lot of work for Magic the Gathering. And of course, one of my favorites is Ian McCaig, who actually painted 4 covers for me. These 3 and also Island of the Lizard King. Now, Ian, I was using at Games Workshop. He was very young and out of college. We had this excitement and this skill that was unbelievable. And he more recently did the cover for Port of Peril for me, and also the cover for Blood Island, the dungeon on Blood Island. He also then went on to work for George Lucas and created Darth Maul. And the cover of my book, City of Thieves, with the protagonist Sam Barbone and Darth Maul, I would argue that they are related. Perhaps distant cousins. But it's amazing that Ian went on to do this incredible work in the film world, having started his work for us with Fighting Fantasy. Another great artist to work with, who did lots of illustrations and covers, Martin McKenna. Sadly, he passed away a few years ago. Also passed away was Chris Akelios, who did a lot of work for us, of course, notably Titan and also Out of the Pit. He was amazing in the cover of, and Brian Bolland, who did several covers for us. Everyone knows Brian Bolland from his Judge Dredd days and all his comic book work. He also did the cover for me for the Judge Dredd board game, which was published at Games Workshop in 1980. Jim Burns, who's a master craftsman in his work, did several covers for us. And of course, a big shout out for Kristen Baller, who's right here. Kristen did lots of stuff and working on some of our game books, which we subsequently used to replace some of the art that wasn't so good provided by Scholastic. And we really love his style, and he's a great guy, and you must give him a big shout out one more time. Come on, stand up. Of course, this is from the dungeon of Blood Island, and I really like this illustration. And if you want to see Christian's work and all the artists we work with, Chameleon Comics are also publishing Magic Realms in Hungarian version. So there's been foreign editions, published in over 30 languages, still published in 15 languages today. Some of the Japanese versions, more later ones, and the Polish and the Bulgarian, some of the French editions here, Portuguese, Danish. I don't know what this language is. It looks an impossible language to me. Yeah, I can't pronounce any of that, I'm afraid. No, don't apologize. And I'm just going to show you one kind of weird thing. Usually foreign publishers used our covers because we know, or like to think we know, that our readers are pretty much united universally in their appeal of what fantasy should look like. But occasionally some countries convince us that they should use their artists because they know their market better than we do. And in the 1980s or 90s, I can't remember when it was, Japan publisher, a new Japanese publisher said, we're going for a new style. They didn't ask for our approval, which was quite unusual because we usually give our approval to the artwork. And these are all Death Trap dungeons from various countries. Here's the Japanese edition. It's a bit of a surprise. Not the usual cover we use. But anyway, we move on. So 20 million copies sold globally. I'm really proud that's happened and it's still relevant today. Oh, you know, some 44 years later. There's been colouring books and we're still waiting. Where is that comic? Where is that comic book coming? Where are you hiding? Julia, I know you're out there somewhere. You heard? Yeah, well, you can ask Julia later. There's the comic book for Freeway Fighter, there's been miniatures from Blue Giant, there's been quite a lot of apps and video games based on fighting fantasy. 2 board games came out recently. One from Martin Wallace and one that just concluded on Kickstarter from Ulysses Games, The Wall of Fire Top Mountain. So I'm very excited that we're still doing it. Steve Jackson sadly can't be with us because he's quite ill and so he doesn't travel anymore. But this was us celebrating our 40th anniversary and we launched 2 new books. And this is Steve and I quite recently in my little library of fighting fantasy game books. So he says hello and wishes you all the best. And this is just to announce that I'm writing a new fighting fantasy game book, which is going to be out this year, if I can find some more time to write it. Thank you. I would like to say, any questions?
So I just want to say, akarom mondani, hogy ha valakinek kérdése van, oda rohanok hozzá a mikrofonnal, ha nem tud angolul, szívesen fordítok kezeket föl. Egy pár kérdése van, csak időnk. Szaladok.
I don't mind being embarrassed. I'm too old to care. I'll answer any question. What about fighting fantasy?
Bocsánat, hol vagy? Gyere közel. Reméltem, hogy leesek a lépcsőn. Physical.
I hope you're going to translate, David.
So about the latest publication, the Kickstarter one from Steve Jackson. So the Warlock of Fire Top Mountain, it doesn't have the original art. Why is that? Do you know?
You talk about the cover because
the cover
has the original interior art from Russ.
Yep, the cover.
They're going to republish it with the new piece by Karl Kopinski, but not the original Peter Jones art. We don't actually own that art, so we were unable to use it.
Got it. Thank you.
I have another question. Sorry,
Yeah, there's questions here.
Okay,
one here.
I'll get them to you in a second. So the question from the gentleman was, what was in your childhood the most significant thing you read that inspired you?
Well, of course I read Lord of the Rings, but I used to read lots of comics. Comics fired up my imagination. And as I got older, I started reading lots of science fiction books. I mean, people like Philip K. Dick and Heinlein and Zelazny and Frank Herbert, and so I used to eat up science fiction. I used to like Worlds of Wonder. It's funny that I enjoyed reading science fiction books, but I like playing fantasy games. So when people ask me where do I get my inspiration from, all of those, but also travel. Wherever I go, I make notes, and when I went to Thailand in 1980, trekking along the northern border near the hill tribes near Burma, you know, I took photos of the people and some of the sketches and some of the places that are in depth I've done from those travels. So I think travel really inspires me as much as anything else.
I have a next one from here.
So first of all, my name is Tomasz, hi. And I'd like to tell you that you were one of the inspiration for me in my childhood, so thank you for the many countless hours. That's to start with. And my question is that with the emerging life of the AI that we see today, have you ever considered to use large language models or any upcoming works together, or this remains most like a classical piece of art?
I've only just started using a computer. I will never use AI for writing my books. I don't use any software. When I started writing, I used pen and ink, and I still make manual flowcharts. I should have put some on in the presentation, but no. And so AI will have a use in the world. Of course, it can be used as a tool for other industries. It can help solve big problems, whether it's climate or health or feeding the whole world. I think AI can play a great role in that, but it's got no place in fighting fantasy.
Last question.
Hello, sir. I have two questions. If you don't like one, just pick the other. First one would be, of all the books that you wrote or co-wrote, which one do you hold dearest in your heart?
Yeah.
And the backup question would be, do you write any personal inspiration into your books in a fantasized, abstract way, or even directly? Thank you.
I always dodge the first question by saying, that's a bit like asking me which is my favourite child, and I've got 4 kids. So I always say I'll give you 4 books, and those 4 are The Warlock of Firetop Mountain, because it was the first one, so it's the most emotional one, and it was written with Steve Jackson, business partner and lifelong friend. And the other ones are City of Thieves, Death Trap Dungeon, and Forest of Doom is in there because it's the first one I wrote on my own. So I think probably Death Trap and City of Thieves are probably my best, but emotionally the other 2 are important. Okay.
Budapest Comic Con, please give a huge, deafening shout out to the legend, the myth.
Thank you very much. And may your stamina never fail.